Welcome, everyone, to another live stream. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong, and as you can see, I am joined by returning guest, special guest, George Galloway, host of the Mother of All Talk Shows, former UK MP, and a fan favorite. George, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here today.
Always a pleasure, Dan.
Great. Before we begin, everyone, make sure you hit that like button, please. That helps get more viewers here. Also, you can find George's show in the video description here on YouTube. Welcome, Rumble. Welcome, Rockfin community. And welcome to all the moderators who are here today. You can go to the video description also to find ways to support this channel. But let us get started. I wanted to ask you, George, about... Today was it's January 11th. Some of those who are watching this may see this tomorrow, but it's January 11th. And it was the first day of a 2-day hearing at the ICJ, taking Israel to The Hague. South Africa put in the application for this to enforce the genocide conventions. I don't know if you were able to follow any of the proceedings today. There were really high praises coming from all over the world around how this went for South Africa and, of course, those who are supporting South Africa, dozens of countries. What's your impressions of this, and what is the significance of this given the ongoing brutal war that Israel is engaged in Gaza?
Well, this was a red letter day, as we say, a day that will always be remembered when the global South stepped forward, center stage in world affairs and seized the attention of a global audience, except viewers of the BBC who didn't see a single minute of it. I watched every minute of it and read every one of the 84-page case that South Africa has made, which was, in a word, irrefutable, not least because they relied in considerable part on the televised words of Israel's leaders themselves. They condemned themselves of the crime of genocide out of their own mouths, and their soldiers indicated that they had heard their leaders and helpfully videotaped themselves carrying out the genocidal orders. And many of those videos made it to the august halls of the ICJ in The Hague today. Israel's defense has already been mounted. Within a minute of the close of proceedings, one Israeli minister accused South Africa of being the legal arm of Hamas, and another Israeli minister accused the court itself of being riddled with anti-Semitism, which gives you an indication of what they intend to say in their defense tomorrow. Even though a blind man could see, it's no defense at all to cite what other people have done as a justification for your conduct as a signatory of the ICJ. The Genocide Convention is quite unusual, Danny, in that both the United States and Israel have signed it and are bound by it. The US has never signed and joined the International Criminal Court, for example, the ICC, even though it's always trying to refer people to it, it didn't join it itself, and indeed passed legislation in the Congress empowering the US government to invade The Hague. Some of your viewers might think I'm making that up, but there's a US law called the Invasion of The Hague Act, which empowers the US government to actually invade the Netherlands and The Hague and the court to seize people from it, should it have the temerity to judge America's conduct. You really couldn't make that up, but it's absolutely true. So Israel is indissolubly linked and joined with the Genocide Convention, indissolubly bound by it, as is its chief armorer, funder, and diplomatic and political protection racket, namely the government of the United States of America. So there's no getting out of this one. If the court, and I frankly cannot see any other outcome, makes a preliminary finding that there is cause for concern under the Genocide Convention and orders an injunction, you might call it in legal terms, i.e. a temporary stay in Israel's actions, what's called a cease and desist order. It seems to me impossible that the court can do other than that, and then proceed to consider the case more deeply, at more length. And if that happens, I argue, not everyone agrees, that it will be impossible for Israel's backers to continue business as usual. Joe Biden's in an election year. Is he really going to fight an election in defiance of a finding on the Genocide Convention? I doubt that. He might even welcome it as an off-ramp, as an exit ramp from this highway of death that they are on. I can say for sure that no Western European government will be able to continue business as usual with Netanyahu in the event of such a finding, because to do so would place them in danger of prosecution in their own country in cases brought by their own citizens, which could end up with them behind bars. I'm not exaggerating. So if the court finds in favor of South Africa against Israel, all will be changed utterly. The whole world will be changed, and I believe for the better, and I hope for good. But even if, for some undefinable, undiscernible reason, the court were to succumb to the insults and threats of Israel towards it and reject South Africa's moment today, I still believe everything will be changed. Nothing will ever be the same again, because you've no idea, I think, how the Palestinians felt seeing someone at the center of world attention, a foreign government speaking up for them in these clarion, crystal clear terms, the lift that gave them, the pride of the global South, that South Africa, which struggled so long and so hard for its freedom, was the agency of that moment. It was like Nelson Mandela coming back to life and standing there like a colossus bestride the watching world. And that will never be forgotten. I have a real feeling that this was a major turning point in world events today.
Yeah, no, I mean everything you say is so important, and I'm glad you brought up the Hague Invasion Act that the United States passed during the Bush II era in August of 2002. Here it says a Human Rights Watch. This is absolutely just, I think, shocking, probably to many. The new law authorizes the use of military force to liberate any American or citizen of a U.S. allied country being held by the court located in The Hague. It's dubbed the Hague Invasion Clause, which caused strong reaction from U.S. allies around the world, particularly in the Netherlands. So you are indeed correct, George. This is actually on the books. And
Now
your
ponder,
point,
Danny, ponder that for a moment. not just any US citizen, but the citizen of any US ally.
Ally.
That means, I don't want to put you in trouble by naming names, but think of some of the US allies. Think of the crimes that they have committed. Think of the possibility that they could end up before this court in The Hague, and the US Army will invade The Hague to spring them. I mean, it's a B movie. It's a Hollywood B movie. It's the Dirty Dozen squared. It's almost unbelievable. It's almost laughable, but it's true. It's US domestic law, as you've just shown.
Yeah, it is. And your broader point too about the significance of this and how what South Africa has done, I think, has accelerated all the way back. We're talking over 20 years ago. This it's like a quagmire. It's like a trap that the United States cannot get itself out of. They're totally dedicated, the neocons, the foreign policy establishment, to backing Israel, and now the world has this huge stage that South Africa has so eloquently and heroically used for the Palestinian people. And maybe you can go over some of the scenarios. Let's say the courts do rule, the ICJ rules in South Africa's favor. What do you think would be the consequences? Because it's quite clear that Israel doesn't have much incentive to stop, but how could this change things? You said it would change things forever. How could it?
Well, in Shakespeare's words, the brave man dies only once, the coward dies many times before his death, and South Africa proved its bravery today. You can only imagine the kind of bribery and browbeating that South Africa has endured since late last year, when it came forward with this triggering of the Genocide Convention. And a measure of that is that no one else did it. No one else would do it. Everyone else was either afraid to do it, in the case probably of most Arab countries, or in the case of Western countries, they were so, again, to continue Shakespeare, so steeped in blood that they had to ask, was it bloodier to go on or to go our? The fact that nobody else did it is testament to the consequences, potential consequences of having done it. The editor of the Jerusalem Post today promised to exact a price from South Africa for what they have done. We can only imagine what that price might be. But South Africa, with all its history, which is important for people to know, I happen to have had the honor to play a small part in that liberation struggle. I actually left my blood on the floor of the Gugulethu police station in Cape Town, South Africa, after a beating from a white apartheid South African police officer. I was for decades involved in this struggle. I saw it triumph. And somehow today I felt that Mandela was back amongst us, that Joe Slovo was back amongst us, that the heroes, Ruth First, Albie Sachs, all of the latter Jews, by the way, were back amongst us. It was a moment of unadulterated joy for me to see the flag of free South Africa proving itself the only country that would bring this case. And then when we heard the case, saw how irrefutable it is, saw that only a kangaroo court could possibly reject it, saw the unanswerable nature of the charges, on the videos from the mouths of the Israeli leaders and their agents on the ground in Gaza, it seemed like a dam had broken. The floodgates had opened, and it will not be able to be turned back. Now, everyone knows that a country in the global south has rights, and if it has the courage to exercise them, can cause tremendous problems for the empire. And countries in Africa are proving that every day. You know, the country of Niger, a tiny country, just nationalized its water supplies, ending 50 years of monopoly control over its drinking water by the colonial power France. Niger has already kicked the French armed forces out of its country. So has Burkina Faso. And all over the global south, countries are realizing their power, that the great only appear to be great as long as the rest of us are on our knees. Well, South Africa is not on its knees. It stood up tall and showed what can be done, what must be done if a new world is to be born. We are living in a time of monsters, to be sure, but those monsters are enfeebled. They can still kill. You know, Chairman Mao said the US imperialism was a paper tiger. Well, it was a bit of an exaggeration, especially at the time that it was said, but my goodness, it's a paper tiger now. Iran just seized the oil tanker that America stole from them, stole the oil from it, and stole its name, renamed it St. Nicholas, Santa Claus, if you like. Iran just took it back in the Persian Gulf. What's America going to do about it? Nothing is the answer to that. The empire is a paper tiger. It is able to be challenged, and when challenged, to be defeated. Your name is Dhaiphong, very proud name. I'm so old, I saw the Vietnamese people rise up and defeat the most powerful empire that the world had ever seen. Men and women in sandals, men and women with only a Kalashnikov on their back, men and women living and fighting in tunnels, people who fought the giant war machine of the United States and was victorious. Everything's changing. Everything is moving all the time. There is nothing as constant as change, as Marx said. And that change is now reaching qualitative tipping point. And the events in the Persian Gulf today and the events in The Hague today are luminous examples of that change. Hallelujah.
Yes, indeed. I was very lucky to be in Vietnam just a couple months ago and see just what victory can really bring. I mean, what you're describing, that's exactly what the Vietnamese people did. And now with peace, the Vietnamese people have been able to accomplish things that no one 50 years plus ago would have been able to imagine. Now, with this turning point with regard to Palestine, I'm wondering if you could just share a few words of optimism about this, because I know both you and you've been in politics and, of course, the broader political movement for quite a long time. And you've been doing a lot of coverage of what's going on in Gaza. And what many people I know in the collective West, especially in the United States where I reside, there's a lot of despair, right? There's a lot of that going on. But with what's going on at The Hague, as you said, with what's going on at The Hague, with what is going on in the region, talk about the optimism that perhaps these recent events can really bring as we move toward what is, I believe, I totally agree with you. There is a turning point in this particular iteration of the conflict. And it seems like things are going to change forever. I'm young enough to not really have seen wars like Vietnam. Even I was very young, even when Iraq was going on. But I've never seen, and it's hard to cite an example where a country or an entity, I should say, like Israel, was taken to The Hague by a country like South Africa, and it received this much support, this much attention, and this much pressure on behalf of the Palestinian people.
Well, last night, the arch criminal Netanyahu was forced to go on television and speak in English. These people have a narrative, a discourse in English, and a different one in their own language. But he was forced to go on television last night and speak in English and state unequivocally that Israel has no intention of removing the Palestinian people from Gaza. This, of course, totally contradicts everything that they have said and done over the last almost 100 days. It contradicts every statement that has been made by high officials, right up to the president himself, Herzog. But Netanyahu was forced to state it and will not now be able to go back on it. So all this talk that they were going to be building new settlement cities on the Mediterranean beaches of Gaza, that they were going to dig a Ben Gurion Canal through Gaza and scupper the Suez Canal and Egypt, all this talk about sending the Palestinians to the Congo, imagine, and so on. All of that is now null and void because Netanyahu has been forced to state that it is not their intention to remove the Palestinians from Gaza. This is a very considerable victory. And just like the victory in South Africa, it has been won between the hammer and the anvil. The hammer of the armed struggle and resistance of the partisans in Palestine itself, and the anvil of international solidarity, international immovability. And South Africa has shown itself to be the bravest and the most forthcoming of those. This is a considerable victory that should not be underestimated. But the Israeli withdrawal of almost all of their soldiers from the north of Gaza, without showing on a plate a single trophy that they have won there, without showing a single destroyed tunnel about which they cackle endlessly, without releasing a single one of their prisoners that are being held there, some of them prisoners of war, some of them hostages, is a very considerable victory for the Palestinian people, who slightly better armed than the Vietnamese because of the passage of time, but still just guerrilla fighters, partisans, behind enemy lines, wreaking a terrible toll on the Israeli armed forces, who don't like losses. You know, they're a small country, they're a small population, it's a conscript army. Everyone has families and friends and workmates from whom they've been torn and sent into Gaza. The killing of one of those soldiers is a big event in Israeli society. Ho Chi Minh said, we know that you can kill 10 of us for every one of you that we can kill. but in the end we shall prevail. And that is also true in this conflict in Gaza. The Israelis have withdrawn their troops not because they've already won, but because they've already lost. The fact that Israel cannot invade Lebanon is because the partisan army there is 100 times more powerful than the guerrilla army facing them in Gaza, with weapons that could literally level, flatten all of Israel, all of its cities and its towns, its airports, its factories, and even threaten its nuclear weapons under the ground in Dimona themselves. So they cannot fight Hezbollah. They have failed to defeat. I'm not saying Hamas beat them, but as you know, a guerrilla army wins if it does not lose. A conventional army loses if it does not win. And that's what Israel is now facing on its southern and northern front. Palestine's allies in the Yemen, far away in the Yemen, the poorest country in the world, has the means of delivering missiles on Tel Aviv. The Iraqi resistance has the same means or more. The looming presence of an undefeatable Iran, they're all the time talking. Lindsey Graham's constantly talking about attacking Iran, making war on Iran. Iran could defeat the United States in a war. It could sink every American ship in the Persian Gulf. It could bring the world economy to a complete halt. And of course, it has the means of destroying Israel. And who knows what means, in truth, it has. Israel rests on its supremacy as an illegally acquired and held nuclear weapons country. But what if Iran has nuclear weapons? And why shouldn't it? If Israel has nuclear weapons and is threatening Iran, why shouldn't Iran have nuclear weapons? And maybe it does. Maybe it's already got them. Maybe they're a week or 2 or 5 or 10 weeks away. So the whole balance of power in the region has changed, and no amount of floating aircraft carrier targets in the Eastern Mediterranean is going to change that equation. And of course, we now live in a world where Russia and China have effectively become one country, certainly one power, and Russia and China have proved and could easily prove many times over that they are on the side of the new order, the new multipolar world. And so every way you look at it, every way you dice it, it's over. The sun is rising in the east and setting in the west. And instead of negotiating our decline, we have bet everything on a zero-sum game approach. Instead of going for win-win, we've gone for all or nothing. And I'm afraid we're going to be left in the end with nothing.
Yeah. Yes. And we can zoom in on the United States a bit now that you bring up the regional consequences. Antony Blinken was traveling or traversing the Middle East once again for what seems like the half dozenth of times, traveling to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, everywhere he can go, talking to the Palestinian Authority. The idea of this has been, and this is what the Biden administration has said, is to prevent a regional war, to de-escalate the situation. That has been the framing. But one of the things that's been quite clear is that while the United States has from the very beginning inflamed regional tensions since Israel has gone on its onslaught, it has also expressed, maybe it's disingenuous, but in my estimation, it is a genuine fear that the United States will get pulled in to a conflict that Israel cannot win regionally. It cannot, as you said, if the U.S. can't defeat Iran, if the U.S. cannot take on Hezbollah, what makes us think that Israel can? So, with that said, I wanted to just pull up a graphic because you mentioned Yemen, the Red Sea situation. Constantly, the United States has been saying over the last several days that there is no damage being done, that Yemen is not doing any damage, the Houthis aren't doing any damage. But the Financial Times just wrote an article about this situation, and you mentioned Paper Tiger. Here are all of the U.S. forces scattered about West Asia and, of course, Northern Africa. And we're talking about 57,000 personnel, dozens of military installations, and just untold numbers of weapons. What's going on here? Why hasn't the United States been able to stabilize the situation? Why is it that so many people view Israel as being the one in the driver's seat, even though both you and I know that the United States has a lot of leverage when it comes to its relationship with Israel?
Well, Israel is a client state of the United States. And ordinarily, the tail does not wag the dog. But we'll come back to that point. With all of these forces, well, it seems like a decade ago now, but it's only 2 years ago that it's less than 2 years ago, that the United States Army snuck out of Afghanistan like a thief in the night, leaving, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars worth, maybe billions of dollars worth of weapons and equipment to the people they'd just spent 20 years trying to defeat in a war, the Taliban, no less. So it's not hard to believe that the United States can have all this firepower, can have all these men under arms, but still lose to local people, to the natives of the lands that they are occupying. But usually you can see a point. You can say the United States has forces here for that reason. But what is the point of the United States forces in Iraq? Which, I warn American mothers and fathers, is in a Benghazi situation right now. God forbid, but they could wake up one day and that base has been overrun and all the Americans in it killed. The Iraqi parliament has a year ago ordered American forces to leave Iraq. The Iraqi prime minister has just ordered them from the prime minister's office to leave Iraq. And they say they will not leave. Well, what choice does that give the people of Iraq? The parliament wants them out. The prime minister's told them to go. The US says no. Well, what happens next? It's kind of obvious, you know. What is the purpose of the American forces in Syria? In an illegal, isolated, totally surrounded base. That's another Benghazi waiting to happen. And there are many other Benghazis that you could pick out from that graphic that you have just shown. And the point is, it doesn't achieve anything. This projection of American power is showing America's weakness, not its strength. And so I'm asking the American people and the British people as their loyal vassal state to wake up and smell the coffee, to wake up and realize that the world is changed. and that no good can come of us, pretending that we are still the Roman Empire that can dispatch legions to every part of the world and impose our will. We cannot, and it has been amply proven that we cannot. Now, the point about a client state that gets out of control is the reality we're now facing here. Of course, in the medium term, the United States can impose its will on Israel. A significant number of Israel's citizens are, in fact, American citizens, although many of them have left. All the money and all the weapons that Israel uses come from the United States. So they have what you called leverage. But in the short term, how do you know Netanyahu's not going to pull a Samson act and bring the whole house down on everybody's head? When your client is not a poodle, but a pit bull terrier, you're in danger yourself. That terrier might savage you, might savage your vital interests before you are able to stop them. That's why it is so profoundly unhealthy that your entire political class seems to be a wholly owned subsidiary of the Israel lobby. And that Israel lobby is not, of course, a Jewish lobby. It's a fundamentalist evangelical Christian Zionist lobby, more than it is a Jewish lobby, and a very large and significant part of America's Jewish community is against Netanyahu and for justice in the conflict we are talking about. But when I see senators almost like robots, almost catatonically walking the American people deeper and deeper into this quagmire you described, I wonder when the American people are going to say enough of this, no further. I mean, even the so-called American First Brigade, turns out they're not America First at all. They're Israel First, even if Israel's interests diverge from the interests of the United States. When I see you passing resolutions in your Congress, virtually nem con, virtually unanimously, making it a crime to boycott Israel, making it a crime to stand up for the Palestinians, to wear certain clothes, to chant certain slogans, to hold up certain placards, the egregious scrapping, trashing of your constitutional freedoms and liberties, all in the interests of a small country of 7 million people on the Eastern Mediterranean shores. I mean, America is a great country, a great power, the greatest we've ever seen. Why is it being led by the nose by Benjamin Netanyahu, a man that most people in Israel think should be in jail, never mind being allowed to pull the world into a potentially global catastrophe?
You know, you raised the America Firsters, the resolutions in the United States around anti-Semitism and Zionism. It's notable that on these issues, we see complete lockstep unity between those America Firsters who maybe oppose Ukraine, funding, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, and also those so-called progressives, quote unquote, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Cori Bush, etc. They all signed on to the resolution that equates Zionism and anti-Semitism. So I think it's critical to point that out. Now, given this, maybe we can close on the question of Gaza here. Given the situation where it is, intense pressure on Israel, really the United States, I mean, maybe it was always a kind of a Satan sandwich for the U.S. from the very beginning to basically pour everything it could into Israel to have it meet U.S. foreign policy objectives, giving it so much influence in this region, and then being caught in a larger geopolitical picture that the U.S. finds itself in, a failing proxy war in Ukraine, lowering prospects. I think Biden's attempt at a fake rapprochement with China shows that there are dim prospects in Asia. You mentioned Niger and the heroic situation in the west of Africa. Seems like geopolitical prospects for the U.S. are quite dim. And then suddenly on October 7th, when the Palestinian resistance waged this or ignited this recent iteration of the conflict, the U.S., everyone was talking about Israel being caught with its pants down. It seemed like the U.S. was not expecting at all to have to escalate like it has in the Middle East. So, I mean, how does the U.S. adjust to this situation? And what are the implications, do you feel like, for its position in the world?
Well, if I know the things I've just said to you about the possibilities that would occur if a wider war was ignited, and I left school at 15 to go and work in a factory, you can be sure that the Ivy Leaguers in Foggy Bottom also know it. I'm not some oracle here. I'm not imparting to you undiscovered truths. The people who rule us, they already know all of these things and more. They must. So that's why America doesn't want a wider regional war. They're telling the truth about that. Some on the left imagine that they do, but in truth they don't, because they know what the likely outcome of that wider conflagration would be. But they have a client that they have armed to the teeth and sharpened those teeth endlessly, that is no longer under their control. Blinken proves it every time he goes there. Every time he goes there, he tells us that he's told them that there needs to be less civilian casualties, there needs to be more precision, needs to be more care taken, and the numbers of dead and maimed goes up rather than down. So they have ample evidence that their client is not taking their orders. And that, of course, demonstrates their weakness still further, as does their unwillingness, inability to check or stop the growing influence of Iran and the axis of resistance and its fighting abilities and its economic strength. I've just been talking with some Iranian friends online just an hour ago, and the optimism in the air in Iran about their new geopolitical and economic situation is palpable. The failure of the US to destroy Iran is another indicator, marker of their growing weakness. So what's going to happen? This brings me back to the ICJ. When I raised this on my own show, the mother of all talk shows, virtually nobody agreed with me, but I'm iterating it now again. There are many people who need an off-ramp. There are many people who need an exit from this before it becomes uncontrollably dangerous. And wouldn't the ICJ ordering Israel to cease and desist be the perfect off-ramp? Wouldn't it be the perfect excuse to say, look, client, we'd love to, but we can't, because to do so, we'd be in defiance of the highest court in the world on the most sensitive subject in the world, namely genocide. So I've got my fingers crossed. I'm a religious man. I pray to God that this court delivers a verdict that can save Palestinian lives, save Israeli lives, save Lebanese lives and Yemeni lives, and perhaps save all of us.
Yeah. And I think the fact that the ICJ will not only hear this case, but will be under immense. Some people have been pessimistic and said, oh, well, the ICJ could take years to rule on this. The Western mainstream media, of course, loves to sow the pessimism. They don't really want to see this explode. But at the same time, there were quite a few number of protesters already outside of The Hague, and worldwide, there's so much attention on this. I'm not quite sure if there's ever been a case, definitely not in my lifetime, of an ICJ case receiving this amount of public scrutiny and attention worldwide. So I think, your point is definitely taken. I think sometimes it's hard for especially people just following this, the atrocities, and having understandable pessimism, if not complete and utter distrust in the whole of the collective West, especially the U.S. Leader, the head of it, because politics is can be a bit more sophisticated when there is this much pressure, and you have the United States from the very beginning, maybe doing the opposite of this, but trying to massage Israel's approach to this, knowing how consequential it is to the current U.S. administration. Israel may not care, but it is quite consequential for the current U.S. administration, as well as whoever takes the helm, whether it's Biden or someone else, Trump, whoever. It is quite consequential that this thing continues on, and that the negative attention on the U.S.'s role in it continues. I don't think we've seen this in the modern history, especially in the last couple of decades, when it comes to the Palestine question. It truly has brought it back on the map in ways that I could not have predicted before October 7th. And then I just want to close on this here. On December 14th, Jake Sullivan met with Mr. Gallant, Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, who is probably one of the top, if we talk about those who have uttered many things in relation to genocide on Palestinians in Gaza. But I think this gets to your point about the tail wagging the dog, so to speak. Here you have just Israel out of control. And this was the moment where I recognized that regardless of what the U.S. is saying, Israel is willing to publicly defy the United States' own wishes. Here is what he had to say about the state of the war and how long it might go.
So thank you for being side by side with us in this effort. The Hamas is a terror organization that built itself for a decade to fight Israel. And they build infrastructure under the ground and on the ground. And it is not easy to destroy them. It will take and require a long period of time. It will last more than several months, but we will win and we will destroy them.
It will last several. This was as the United States was trying to push Israel to not just enter a low intensity phase, but to perhaps extend a longer ceasefire, humanitarian ceasefire, than it had already partially agreed to. So I think that says it all about where things are at.
Danny, there's a wonderful Yiddish word, so many wonderful Yiddish words, chutzpah. That's what was on display there. What we in Scotland would call a brass neck. The arrogance with which the tail wagged the dog there was palpable, was visible on Sullivan's face. And I just want to stress this point. The court can order an immediate cessation. It doesn't have to deal with the whole case on its merits. That can take years, would take years. But it can order a cease and desist tomorrow evening or over the weekend after they have consulted. That wouldn't make Netanyahu stop necessarily, although it might, but it's unlikely that it would. But it would certainly immediately confront the Western governments and the Western leaders with a gigantic, an Everest of a political and legal problem. And that would then begin to put real pressure on Joe Biden and on Netanyahu. Look, we have to wrap this thing up. We are now in such perilous waters, we could end up on trial in our own countries for breaking a genocide convention which we drew up, we wrote, and we signed, and to which we are bound. It's been marvelous. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have. Hope I haven't spoken too long, Danny.
No. This topic deserves as long as we can give it. Maybe we can now transition to another proxy out of control and another quagmire that the United States and its NATO vassals have found itself in, and that is the one that is not getting as much attention these days because of Israel's complete and utterly public, and to give the people of the world credit, publicized just genocide of Gaza. But Ukraine, we are in a situation. Russia's defense ministry has released just astounding numbers. Nearly 300,000 Ukrainians killed in action over the last year. Tens of thousands of units of military equipment destroyed over the course of 2023. Now we are seeing, and I would definitely want your comment on this about Europe. We've had Italy now come up. This was a recent report here on its position on the war. Italy is now saying it's time for diplomatic action over Ukraine as pressure mounts for peace talks. So Italy's defense minister said that while Rome's support of Ukraine remains steadfast, time has come for incisive diplomatic action alongside the aid we are providing. And then, of course, you have the United States situation, which I think is influencing the European situation. Here you have Mr. Miller. I'll just play what he had to say, spokesperson of the State Department. This is what he said about support for Ukraine, which is, from the State Department, I think, a huge shift.
Continue to support Ukraine. It is the policy of the United States.
As long as it takes.
As long as it takes. That does not mean that we are going to continue to support them at the same level of military funding that we did in 2022 and 2023. We don't think that should be necessary because the goal is to ultimately transition Ukraine, to use the language that you repeated back, to stand on its own feet and to help Ukraine build its own industrial base and its own military industrial base so it can both finance and build and acquire munitions on its own. But we are not there yet. And that is why it is so critical that Congress passed the supplemental funding bill.
So as long as it takes, but the aid isn't really coming in. And the situation in Ukraine, you have Western mainstream media everywhere talking about winning through defense, Ukraine on the defensive. This is a huge shift. What has been your impressions on the way that this conflict has changed?
Well, Zelensky just heard the same kind of thing that the late president of Afghanistan, whose name no longer matters. He escaped with bags full of cash. And he was probably told that just about midnight on the night that the United States left in the night and left him standing. The South Vietnamese leaders heard the same thing just before the Viet Cong tank smashed through the gates of the American embassy. The sound of shredders, the sound of bags being packed, the sound of banknotes being stacked in preparation for the final flight out. These are all present now in Kiev. The people are turning against Zelensky, even those that fought with him, alongside him, even his chief of defense, Zaluzhny, even his former spokespeople, the mayor of Kiev itself, Klitschko, they are all preparing for a post-Zelensky world. And Zelensky will go off, if he can get out in time, to one of his lavish properties bought by your taxpayer for him over the last couple of years. The question is, what peace talks? What basis for peace talks? If it's peace talks to leave a hostile anti-Russian government in power in Kiev with its NATO patrons still in place, why would Russia be interested in that kind of peace talks? Why would Russia be interested in peace talks that left the ethnic Russian-speaking people of the south of Ukraine, in Odessa, for example, the quintessentially Russian city of Odessa? Why would Russia be interested in abandoning those people to the tender mercies of an ultra-nationalist, heavily infiltrated and buttressed by fascism power in Kiev? That doesn't make any sense. This war will end when Russia can trust that an entirely neutral Western Ukraine can be trusted not to use their country as it has been used repeatedly throughout history as the avenue down which those invading Russia can freely pass. And we're a long, long way from that. The circumstances in which that kind of Western Ukraine could emerge are very, very far distant. They might turn up quickly, maybe quicker than we thought. Sometimes these things do. But in the meantime, the Russians will keep on advancing. The Ukrainians will keep on retreating. Ukraine is running out of money. It's running out of people. There's 5 million Ukrainians living outside the country now. 5 million. Some of them are neighbors of mine, and they sure ain't going back to fight for Zelensky.
I've heard that the UK has
received that.
I've heard that the UK actually, there's reports coming out of the UK that Ukrainians are being recruited by the Ukrainian military service, by the Ukrainian armed forces, to go back. And this is coming out of the UK. I don't know if you've heard this.
Yeah, but they'd have to drag them screaming and kicking, and all the Ukrainian in question would have to do is claim political asylum, and the British government would put him up in a 3-star hotel and pay him a stipend whilst he waits for his asylum claim to be dealt with many years down the track. So no, there's nobody coming, nobody's volunteering to fight in the Ukrainian army. They have press ganged. men almost my age. They have press ganged young boys almost my son's age. They have press ganged women. They have press ganged pregnant women into the front line. And nobody is interested in dying for the ultra-nationalist stroke fascist regime in Kiev. So until that regime falls, until it's replaced by people who will recognize that their geography is their geography, their history is their history, it cannot be wished away or imagined differently, and that Russia will never, ever tolerate a neighbor that is intent on being an enemy to Russia, being an enemy to Russian people in their own land, never mind in Russia, and being the enabler of the NATO brazen, open, they don't hide it. NATO's goal is to break up Russia, to regime change Russia. Anyone who imagines that Russia now has a president who's ready to settle for that is living in cloud cuckoo land. I have a bridge here in London. I could sell them going cheap if they are so foolish as to believe that. So the war in Ukraine isn't going to end soon, in my opinion, and it will only end when the ethnically Russian Ukrainians have been liberated and given the opportunity to vote on what their future should be. And all of this could have been avoided. Think about it. If the Minsk II agreements, which didn't demand any of that, had been implemented instead of being used as a device to buy time for a subsequent attack on Russia, all of this could have been avoided. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians now in the cold earth would still be alive, their families complete, and all that blood and treasure would not have been wasted. And the people responsible for it are the Western leaders who determined that this was a useful proxy that they could use as a spear in Russia's side. Well, everybody knows differently now. It's just a pity so many people had to leave their guts on the ground in order to prove it.
Yes, that indeed. And what's been interesting is that this conflict was supposed to be the one that brought Russia down. It was supposed to be kind of the key step in a longstanding U.S. foreign policy objective of essentially balkanizing Russia, destabilizing Russia over the course of what I think most, even in the most hawkish elements of the U.S. Foreign policy regime, understand is going to be a long-term process. But the exact opposite has seemed to occur. Putin is going to run in the next election. He's almost a lock to win. Could you tell the audience what's your view on how Vladimir Putin has navigated this conflict, how the leadership of Russia has navigated this conflict, and how has it that Russia has actually, it seems, ascended in its world position amid really maybe the most significant and intense proxy wars that any country has had to face in recent history?
Well, it's the law of unintended consequences, or as Chairman Mao more poetically put it, sometimes the enemy struggles mightily to lift a huge stone only to drop it on its own feet. And that's exactly what's happened. Russia is not broken, but whole. Russia is not bereft, but booming. Russia and China, the keeping apart of whom was an article of faith of successive US administrations, pioneered by Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger, who just proved that only the good die young. Nixon and Kissinger did what they did in order to widen the difference between China and the then Soviet Union. Now, these idiots in charge in Washington have pushed Russia and China so closely together that they are inseparable economically, politically, militarily, strategically, culturally. They're even getting ready to jointly administer parts of each other's territories and invest in each other's economy. They're trading with each other in their own currencies. They have built the edifice of the BRICS and the SCO. They have their own foreign policy, brokering peace with Iran and Saudi Arabia and so on. This unity that the Americans have created between Russia and China, it's a beautiful thing from my standpoint. But it is an unintended consequence. One presumes, unless we've got agents in the White House. Come to think of it, maybe I better not even joke about that. The result is that the East has won and the West has lost. I sometimes ask myself, Danny, are we led by fools or knaves? And which would be worse, to be led by fools or to be led by knaves? I conclude that we're led by fools and knaves, that they are both fools and knaves. And that's why they keep making these catastrophic blunders all over the world. And unfortunately, our people have to pay the price for it.
Yeah, because it makes a lot of sense. It really is if the United States and of course its vassals in the West are not in agreement with a win-win cooperation or any kind of win-win way of doing foreign policy of all kinds, military, economic, etc. Certainly, any attempt to destroy Russia would engender an effect of Russia seeking other partners more reliable and trustworthy. And that, I think, has been exposed just gravely. You're in, or at least your base from the United Kingdom and the entirety of the European world, the UK, and of course, now it's outside of the European Union, but the UK and the European Union are going through grave economic turmoil, a lot of it because of sanctions, while Russia's doing quite well. And many of our joint friends, mutual friends, have traveled to Russia recently and can all attest to the same. So it would make sense that Russia, given how it's been treated, would find other partners, and it's gone off with a hitch. Now, Western mainstream media is forced to report that China is overtaking Japan and Western manufacturers in car exports, mainly because they have replaced exports to Russia that are no longer being facilitated by those who are following diligently the sanctions regime.
Yes, I spent quite a bit of time in Germany, and I can tell you that it's freezing cold in Germany, by which I mean most public space has had to switch off its heating entirely. Gone are the days when you could sit at a pavement cafe warmed by a heater. All of that is gone in Germany. The whole culture's had to change. Even inside hotel lobbies, inside banks, inside public buildings and so on, it's bitterly cold because people can't afford the power bills, the energy bills, or the government has told them to switch off. And Germany is in a very parlous economic situation. And Germany is the most important economy in Europe. If Germany goes down with the cold, the whole continent will catch influenza or worse, pneumonia. The British economy, don't get me started on it. I don't have time to tell you how miserable it is in the United Kingdom, whilst in Russia, it is very, very far from the case. They tried to destroy the Russian economy. Now the Russian economy, by their own metrics, the metrics of the sanctioning countries, the Russian economy is doing very well indeed. The standard of living of the Russian people is advancing, whilst the standard of living of people in countries like mine, other European countries, is going backwards. Now, that cannot be good sense. I mean, really, ask yourself, how can that be a good idea? How can that be a successful policy? And yet again, I predicted all of this. Me, the uneducated, I predicted all of this, and our betters, our better educated, who told us, no, we must pursue this policy, and it will break Russia. Russia only has enough supplies to last to the weekend, somebody at one point said. Russia is building weapons out of stolen washing machines, someone else said. It was all a lie. It was all a big, big lie. And now we have to face the consequences. The United States gained, sure. You're now selling us dear the gas that Russia used to sell us cheap. And sorry, I don't know if you use the word dear for expensive. You're now selling us expensive what we used to get from Russia cheap, uninterrupted, never used for political purposes, ever. No contract ever interrupted or broken. We had cheap, absolutely reliable Russian gas, which powered our economies from Poland to Portugal. And now we don't. Now we're dependent on your much more expensive, much less green. Whatever happened to the green agenda, by the way? Israel's blowing up the green agenda, the blowing up of Nord Stream 2 released enough methane into the air to poison us all. The reliance now on American energy is, of course, being mirrored by or amplified by the literal relocation of jobs, of industries, of whole factories from countries like Germany to the United States. If we're going to rely on US energy, why not move the factory to the US? And the European people are realizing it and punishing their governments one after the other. Now, the outcome might not be better, might be worse. They punished the Italian government. We got a worse one. They punished the Spanish government, and we got a worse one. Portugal has an election soon. We might get a worse government in Portugal. We're very likely going to get a worse government in France. Forget about Macron's 34-year-old successor winning the presidency next time at the end of this term. Le Pen will win the European parliamentary elections in France by a landslide. Mark my words. The French people have decided we want change. It's not the change I would have liked, but it's definitely going to be change. Schulz in Germany and bonkers Baerbock, his Green Party foreign minister, between the two parties together cannot muster 20% in the opinion polls. They're going to lose, and probably lose to people even worse than them, just like the Italians did. But the people are not buying the current political class anymore. They're not buying the narrative of centrism anymore. I wish they'd go left. They might go right, but they sure ain't sticking with the center.
Yeah. Yes. And the ramifications for Europe have been grave. When I was there in June, I was in Berlin, I was in Brussels. The only person more unpopular than Putin because of all the anti-Russia propaganda, at least in terms of politically and even just walking the streets, Emmanuel Macron. Now, very few people less popular than him. His name you can see all across the streets everywhere in Europe as
Danny, if
being
Putin ran for office in European countries, probably Britain accepted, if Putin ran in Germany, if Putin ran in France, he'd be elected. Putin, despite the demonology surrounding him, has emerged as the winner, and people can see that. Has emerged as a real man, a real leader, and people can see that. Putin picked Russia up off the floor where it was lying drunk with people picking its pocket and stood it upright and returned some dignity to it, and is now the king of the heap. And in his alliance with Xi Jinping, the Chinese leadership, well, here you have two men that are calling the shots and increasingly will do so.
Yeah, and the statement by Xi Jinping that we're witnessing changes not seen in a century during the March 2023 trip that he took to Moscow has certainly played out, from South Africa, a BRICS country, taking Israel, supposedly the superpower of the Middle East, to the ICJ, and then also having BRICS expansion, almost all of those countries, except for Ethiopia, on the list of countries supporting South Africa's case, and of course Russia and China remaining neutral. But also the fact that BRICS has expanded, these countries are becoming more assertive, and Russia is chairing the next BRICS summit this coming year, which is likely to see an even bigger expansion. Actually, it has all been but guaranteed, and Russia and China are in the lead of that. George, do I have you for one more topic? I know I've kept you for a while, but I have one more topic that I wanted to talk to you about, especially given its timeliness. How are you feeling?
Yeah, briefly though, because I've got to go pretty soon, but briefly, yeah.
Sure. Well, let's talk about the election coming up in Taiwan. Your foreign secretary, David Cameron, someone you are very familiar with, he's recently come out and said China's not the same as it was a couple of decades ago. I believe his words were, "It is more aggressive and more assertive." Now there's this election coming up. The Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP, the ruling party in the Taiwan Authority, is set to maybe eke out a narrow victory, although there's a lot more uncertainty, I think, in this election than even 6 months ago. Lai Ching-te is the candidate for the DPP. China, of course, has continued to assert its position on eventual reunification and maintaining the status quo. Seems like the United States and the rest of its vassals are speaking a different tune. What is your impression of what's going on with regard to Taiwan, especially in lieu of this attempted rapprochement that I've been calling a fake rapprochement with China from the United States? And I think we're hearing reports also that the U.S. has now just shipped fuel to the Philippines against the Philippines didn't even know this happened. Fuel to the Philippines to supply its military hardware, which the Philippines is even calling an obvious escalation of a potential conflict surrounding Taiwan.
Well, it's funny you mentioned David Cameron, because the last time I saw him in any kind of China context, he was sitting in a pub eating fish and chips and drinking beer with Xi Jinping, the president of China. But that was long, long ago, in the golden age, as it was described, between Britain and China. It was so long ago. I think it was 7 years ago. 7 years ago, both David Cameron and the finance minister, Chancellor of the Exchequer, he's called in Britain, George Osborne, were not only in the driving seat during that golden age, but that the Queen the late Queen had to ride down the mall with Xi Jinping in a carriage beside her. That's ancient history. In the interim, both Cameron and Osborne joined hedge funds and various wheezes like that sought to make, and maybe did make, how would I know, significant, huge sums of money from doing business with China. Suddenly, China has changed, according to Cameron. It's more aggressive. It's more assertive. Well, what exactly did China do that was aggressive? China has not been aggressive towards anyone. It is us that are sailing our warships in and around Chinese waters. It is us that are building military bases surrounding China, not China building military bases surrounding us. China has a principle from which it has never deviated, and that was once our principle too. We agreed with the One China principle. We signed protocol after protocol, accepting that there was only one China and that Taiwan was China. That was Western policy until very, very recently, from Kissinger and Nixon all the way to very, very recently. Suddenly, we've got this principle being broken in spirit and in fact, with the supply of weapons, cruise missiles, with the visits of leading American politicians, the third in line to the presidency in the case of Nancy Pelosi, provocation after provocation after provocation. China believes in reunifying its country. That's its principle. Obviously, China would prefer to do that peacefully and by agreement. They would like the apple to fall from the tree. But if foreigners are taking over the orchard and making it impossible for that apple to fall, for Taiwan to regain its motherland, what is China supposed to do? Well, one of the provocations has been the encouragement of openly separatist forces in the elections in Taiwan. I mean, I'd find it difficult to vote for any of them in the election. But I'd certainly rather the status quo party won than a party which might well, hoping to exploit the coming back to power, seems to me inevitable, of Donald Trump and his anti-China mania. It might be that the separatist party might take the risk of a declaration of independence or a declaration of independence, of an intended declaration. It might be that that happens. But I like to think that most Taiwan people know that they're Chinese, know that the rest of the world regards them as Chinese. Try taking a trip on the New York subway and explaining that you're not Chinese, you're actually Taiwanese. See if it makes any difference. I like to think that the people of Taiwan have better sense than that. They can look across the straits. They can see the life being led by Chinese people. Let me close on this, Danny. I was recently in Beijing. I came out of the Manchester United superstore, where I bought a very keenly priced Manchester United jacket. The best superstore, better than they have at Manchester United. It's in Beijing. I turned the corner to a street. I don't know what it's called. But it felt to me like there was 1 million people in that street. Every store had a queue 1 mile long of people trying to get into the store. Talk about business booming. I could take you around cities and towns in my country where there aren't any stores left open, where they're all boarded up, where the houses are boarded up. Utter dereliction. I was in one street in Beijing where 1 million people were trying to spend their money. That's how prosperous China has become. If you were in Taiwan, wouldn't you prefer to be a part of a country that will soon be, if it isn't already, the biggest economy in the world, with the most prestige in the world? Wouldn't you rather? Or would you rather be a dog in the manger, Taiwan separatist, hoping that Lindsey Graham is going to come to your aid? I wouldn't put money on that outcome. So I hope very much that negotiated, peaceful reunification of Taiwan with China can be reached, and soon enough, for this generation of Taiwan people to enjoy the fruits of that beautiful orchard that is the People's Republic of China.
Yes, indeed. Well, Mr. Galloway, George, it's been great to have you on. Thanks so much for commenting on this last topic. Everyone follow George Galloway's channel and Mother of All Talk Shows. You can find him tagged, or the channel tagged, in the video description. Thanks so much, and I'll be in touch with you.
Thank you.
Appreciate
I
it.
enjoyed it, Danny. Thank you very much.
Alrighty. Thanks so much. Bye-bye. All right, that was great. Let's continue, though, on this Taiwan topic to give a good preview of what's coming up. Okay, that was great. A commentary from George Galloway, as always, good friend of the show. And we will definitely be in touch with him soon. But this election is happening on Saturday, January 13th. So I just wanted to pull up the story from Bloomberg because I'm going to go down the list of how this election has been covered. Bloomberg says that the latest Taiwan poll shows U.S.-friendly DPP is set for election victory. It says the ruling party candidate is heading toward a narrow win, but voter sentiment could surely change before votes are cast on the 13th. And for those of you who may be viewing this on the 13th, when this clip comes out, it's important to note that these numbers have actually changed quite a bit over recent months. Not 6 months ago, we had seen the DPP, Lai Ching-te, the candidate, actually having quite a big lead. So this lead has narrowed. And many in the Western mainstream media are reporting that some of this has to do with the fact that the DPP is actually campaigning on China, when of course people in Taiwan, the Chinese people in Taiwan, Taiwan in general, people in Taiwan, however they identify, actually have many more concerns. But here they say that Taiwan's final election poll put the ruling party on track to win a record third straight term in power, a setback to Xi Jinping's efforts to bring the island closer to Beijing. And we can argue that later. The Democratic Progressive Party's Vice President Lai Ching-te was the front runner in 3 surveys in recent days, with his lead over the main opposition rival Hu Yi of the Kuomintang, of the KMT, ranging from 3 to 11 percentage points. So, apologies, 3 to 11 percentage points. That's not a lot. Then you have the Taiwan People's Party, Ko Wen-je, trails in 3rd place, according to publicly released polls. Tuesday's the last day surveys are allowed to be published before the blackout period of 10 days ahead of the January 13th election, which has been the island's most hotly contested in decades. In the TVBS and Taiwan Public Opinion Foundation polls, Lai's lead was slightly larger than the margins of error. If the DPP is able to sustain its lead right now and get reelected, we should expect closer watch from both Beijing and Washington on Lai, said a professor of diplomacy at the National Chengchi University. There's a possibility for cross-strait tensions to deteriorate further. This is actually a debated point I'm going to show you in a bit. So Taiwan heads to a close election. So here are the polls of where Lai Ching-te is in the black, where Hu Yi, the KMT, where he stands. So here you see the differences. Some are saying he has a bigger lead of over 10%. Some are saying he has just a narrow lead at about 3%, and then somewhere in between. So that is what Bloomberg is reporting on where the elections are. And now we can look at just quickly how the mainstream media is reporting on this. And actually, the differences are quite stark. So here on the so-called liberal side, on the Atlantic, the liberal foreign policy establishment, the liberal neocons, you could call them, if that's a paradox. I don't think it is anymore. But here you have Beijing won't allow Taiwan's democracy to survive. The very prospect of a free election is a threat. So this is how they are reporting it in the Atlantic. They are talking about the mere existence of a successful democratic Chinese society in Taiwan. So here you see the mental gymnastics that are being put on display here on this election is an affront and a challenge to China's leader Xi Jinping, as well as to its political and global ambitions. Ultimately, if given the opportunity, Xi will destroy Taiwan's democracy to eliminate the inherent threat to his vision. Bonnie Glaser, the famous Bonnie Glaser, who's the director of the Indo-Pacific program at the German Marshall Fund, told the author, "I don't see how this fits into his worldview." So scaremongering from those who acknowledge a Chinese society in Taiwan exists. Quite interesting, to say the least. But then you have the Council on Foreign Relations, maybe the CIA's, the U.S. Foreign Policy Establishment's biggest think tank, saying something a little bit differently. But actually, this article is framed, David Sachs wrote this in the lead up to the election, is framed even more hawkishly, but comes to the conclusion that the status quo actually won't be changed. But the definition of the status quo is important. Why the results won't have much effect on cross-strait relations or U.S.-Chinese tensions. So here he acknowledges that Lai is leading in the polls and that Hu has actually narrowed the yawning gap. That's what I said before, once a yawning gap, and could pull off an upset. But that the candidates, he says, and this I think is mental gymnastics to say the least, that all candidates largely agree on the need to invest more in defense, strengthen relations with the United States and Japan, and maintain the status quo in the Taiwan Strait by eschewing either de jure independence or unification with China. The candidates all seek to secure Taiwan's de facto independence, but disagree on the best way to do so. Ho and Co. place more weight on restarting dialogue with Beijing, which China cut off following Tsai Ing-wen's inauguration in 2016, whereas Lai prioritizes stronger ties with Taiwan's partners. So I want to raise that because that's the Council on Foreign Relations Perspective, the Foreign Affairs magazine. And the mental gymnastics here is, on the one hand, the Foreign Affairs is acknowledging that Taiwan is de facto independent, while speaking of, I'm not sure why there there was confetti there, but de facto independence for Taiwan, while, and get this, while the Atlantic, which is supposed to be more quote unquote progressive, is saying that China is not going to have any of this quote unquote democracy on the Taiwan Straits, yet acknowledge in language that indeed Taiwan is China. There's a Chinese society in Taiwan, albeit one that has these grand elections that are by far superior to whatever governance system exists on mainland China. But regardless of the political gymnastics, mental gymnastics being done by all sides of the foreign policy establishment, it is important to note that this election indeed won't change much. And that is because, on the one hand, you have the United States fully still committed to its war with China. On the other, you have China still committed to peaceful reunification. Okay. When China says that it is committed to peaceful reunification, it is actually telling the truth. Now, you have the BBC claiming, right? You have the BBC claiming that China is outlining a new vision for Taiwan. You have the Western media doing this. You have all kinds of Western media doing this, okay? But China has not changed its position one bit. Here you have Reuters, okay? And let me pull up this article because it's not allowing me in. So I'm going to pull it up in the archives if I am able to. Here, it's not coming up. But here we have Reuters talking about the same thing. And I'm going to get that article up soon. But the point is that there's all kinds of hand-wringing about what is going on with regard to China in Taiwan. But it is important to review the actual position. One, China remains committed to the one China policy. That hasn't changed. China remains committed to this policy. And if we don't understand that, we can actually look at its official position. And I'm going to pull that up in a second. Because its official position is that reunification, yes, is inevitable. But the bigger question here is, what will be the red line that is crossed that will bring China to war? Because China has never rejected the possibility of conflict. That position is quite clear. That position is that if the United States or any foreign country, but we're talking about the United States here because it is the one that is pushing arms sale after arms sale into Taiwan authorities' hands and bringing the U.S. to the brink of war with China. That is the policy that really is the biggest problem facing this regime, facing this overall policy. So I'm going to now pull up, if it will let me, an article on this question. Actually, having many technical difficulties here. All right, Reuters, BBC, you can trust me on this, have indeed all pointed out that a so-called change may be coming in China's policy, that war is on the way. But the fact is that war, if we think about any possibility of war, it's coming from the U.S. side. And that's because it's not just about Taiwan. Taiwan is the lead up to something much bigger. That's why there is a more full hybrid war going on in here is one of the most important aspects of it. So you have the military side. You have China consistently rejecting the United States' continued arms sales to Taiwan. That is important. But you have here China also under attack in the economic realm. The U.S. is weaponizing new economic tools to slow China's war machine, they say. So this is an interesting take. A recent executive order by Biden, unprecedented in scope, could soon bring restrictions on outbound investment flows. First came tariffs on Chinese imports, then several rounds of sanctions and an outright embargo on exports of state-of-the-art computer chip. Now America's multi-year campaign to deter, counter, and stymie Xi Jinping's China, an effort that started with Donald Trump and has escalated under the current administration, is shifting to a new battleground where the stakes are even higher than in trade and technology finance. President Biden directed the Department of Treasury to draw up rules barring U.S. investments in entities suspected in helping develop next-generation weaponry for China's war machine. Soon, probably in the next few months, that ban will go into effect. It won't be the first time America has throttled the flow of capital to China. Both Trump and Biden prohibited U.S. investors from buying a range of publicly traded securities with military ties. But its scope, potentially encompassing any Chinese company or organization, public or private, involved in semiconductors, quantum computing, or AI. This executive order 14105 has no precedent. It covers swaths of the economy, vast swaths, effectively aims to asphyxiate entire industries key to China's capabilities on the battlefield and in cyberspace. The problem with designated specific entities is that it becomes a game of whack-a-mole. Every time you go after one, another pops up. Here they are defining whole categories based on the nature of the business. It's not something the U.S. has ever done before. So the United States is indeed, it looks like the article is not shared. It's not shared. I'm just reading from the article. Here's the article, okay? U.S. is weaponizing new economic tools to slow China's war machine. All right, that was the article I was reading from. But nonetheless, the message is quite clear. The message is that there is an escalating war. It is over Taiwan, and it has to do a lot with both economically attempting to contain China, in doing so with now huge investment bans that are going to hold ramifications for China's defense industry if successful. And that is the key point. Are they going to be successful? But the other ramifications to this are that militarily, we are seeing the United States continue to push weaponry, push arms sales into Taiwan's hands. There's been more than half a dozen of these arms deals. China has instituted sanctions on major arms manufacturers or corporations related to these arms sales, defense contractors. And both of those things put together signify that this election happening on January 13th is going to be yet another escalation, not from the Chinese side, but from the U.S. side. If the DPP does win, that gives, we were talking about off-ramps with George Galloway on this program with regard to Israel and how an ICJ ruling favorable to South Africa, favorable to Palestine, would give the U.S. an off-ramp. An on-ramp for the United States in this period of fake reproach month with China, an on-ramp to war would be a DPP victory, coupled with the fact that the election season in the United States will eventually turn up the dial, turn up the volume, and not just turn up the volume on the election for the United States side, but also lead to a result which would then, a DPP victory plus a U.S. election transition, whether it's Biden, term number 2, Trump, term number 2, of course, a period in between with Biden, whether it's Biden or Trump or someone else, we don't know because we don't know Biden's condition. We cannot predict the chaos of U.S. electoral politics. But regardless, a DPP election plus an election transition in the United States equals more escalations to come. This is why it's always been important to pay attention to what the United States is doing with regard to China, regardless of how much more Ukraine and or especially now or Israel has been taking up headlines. The United States has not given up its foreign policy objectives with regard to China. Indeed, you could say that it has actually intensified them by trying to buy itself time to figure out how it can actually maneuver against China amid multiple quagmires in Ukraine and in Gaza. But as Bloomberg has noted with the economic war on China, and as China has noted in recent weeks with sanctions on defense contractors, this is by far not over. Actually, it is just beginning. So if Lai Ching-te, if the DPP wins, we are not going to see a change in China's position, but war will indeed be coming because the United States will have been provided an on-ramp to begin again, at least more publicly, its dramatic escalations with China, which Bloomberg admits. I'll pull up the article again because Bloomberg admits, and the writing is on the wall. In this article, Bloomberg admitted that, here it is, the effort started a multi-year campaign to deter, encounter, and stymie Xi Jinping's China. An effort started under Donald Trump and escalating under the current administration. If Bloomberg Magazine, a mouthpiece of the U.S. foreign policy establishment, no objectivity here. During the whole Uyghur Xinjiang situation, you had Bloomberg reporters pretending they were being followed. They have done everything they can in Bloomberg to paint a picture of collapse in China, to paint a picture. It's been very, of course, to give Bloomberg credit. I think Bloomberg shows a lot of the contradictions in the predictions around China, in the coverage around China. But Bloomberg itself has done a lot to sow and foment a negative picture and worldview of China in the collective West. So when Bloomberg says that the United States, under all administrations in the last decade, has been, in the last 4 to 5 to 8 years, has been escalating with China, and that it's been progressively getting worse, then we can believe it. And we can believe that this election on January 13th will not be a signifier, a signal to war for China. China already has its position very clear. China follows the one China principle. Indeed, it's one of the architects of this principle and follows UN Resolution 2758 regarding the recognition of the People's Republic of China as the rightful government of China and the Taiwan Authority as not a representative of all of China, and indeed not a representative of anyone, because Taiwan does not sit at the UN itself. So China's position is that if there is provocations towards separatism, if there is a real move in independence vote, as George Galloway noted, then there will be war. But other than that, there will not be further conflict. This is what the United States has started, and this is for the United States to end. But China won't back down, and nothing about this coming election will change that fact. So everyone, this was a great stream. I just wanted to get that story finished. Apologies for some of the technical difficulties. Not sure why these articles faltered on me. But with all of that said, this has been a great stream. We have 2,000 people still watching. As you're watching, make sure you go to the video description. Support this channel on Patreon, on Substack. You can become a YouTube member. You can buy me a coffee. You can do PayPal. There's so many options there. Patreon being the best option available. There you can suggest guests, ask questions of me, of guests. You can also get a PDF copy of my book right up there on American exceptionalism that I provide to everyone who becomes a Patreon member. Substack, YouTube as well, get a number of things as well, including early notifications and access to content. But Patreon is the most robust way to support this work. And of course, you can do one-time options. Those are always great too. All right. So with all of that said, I think we're going to end the stream here. I'm going to do some shout outs. All right. I don't see any chats, super chats today. which I'm sorry to hear. I won't be able to shout out any super chats, but I want to first give a shout out. Let me see if I can see who's in the chat as a moderator. Desert Mantis, thank you so much. Where Pilgrim as well is here. I don't know if I see any other moderators today. It might be just those two. Joe OWS was here. Thank you so much as well for moderating. I don't know if you're still here. Okay. Lots of technical difficulties today. I'm not even able to scroll further up. Human is here as a member. Thanks so much for your membership, Human. Wanted to shout you out. And let's see what else. I don't see any super chats, no questions. Oh, we have Sparky here coming in with the first super chat of the day. Thanks so much. And let's see. People. All right. So let's see. I want to just give a shout out, of course, to all of those on Rumble. Sorry to Rockfin. I hit the live button late. Sorry to all of those on Rockfin. That was my fault. Let's just say it's been quite the busy time for me. Rumble community, thank you so much. You can find me on Rumble at Danny Dhaiphong. I'm actually going to pull that up as I depart, just so you know to follow me. I'm doing this every stream. I have said, putting in the chat, that I'm going to pull it up. You can find me on Rumble here, rumble.com, Danny Dhaiphong. Find me there. Yes, people are saying Andrei Martyanov is going to be on DD Geopolitics 2 p.m. I'm going to be off of here by 2 p.m. Eastern time in about 6 minutes. Head over to DD Geopolitics. Be sure to catch them with Andre at 2 p.m. Eastern. They're great people over at DD Geopolitics. They have done a lot of great work and also have supported me. So if you support me, I support you. So be sure, head over to DD Geopolitics on YouTube. You can just search that in the YouTube search bar. You can also find them on YouTube pretty easily at DD Geopolitics. Find their Telegram if you're a Telegrammer. Go to my Telegram in the link in the video description. And, definitely search them on Telegram. You can get that link there too. So, DD Geopolitics. All right. Be sure to catch them in about 5 minutes. With that said, everybody, let's see actually where they are at, because I know they're live in 5 minutes. Here they are, Andrei Martyanov. All right, there you go. Link in the video, link in the chat now, link in the YouTube chat. All right, everybody. So I may or may not be streaming tomorrow with a special guest. I'll leave that announcement actually now off because I may have to reschedule due to personal situations. All right, let's just say personal situations. I'm very busy lately. Things have been coming up. So if I'm not on tomorrow, I will be on shortly thereafter, early next week. Okay. Tomorrow's a big day. We have the ICJ hearing defense, so-called. Israel side will be able to present its case. That's going to be one of the most I don't know if I can watch that all the way through. I was unable to get to the whole hearing at the ICJ, but certainly I will not be tuning in to the entirety of the Israeli case. Someone said bring the deprogram guys. Said Lewis, yes, I would like to do that actually. Deprogram guys are great. I've been on their program once. I've been in touch with Hakeem. So Deprogram podcast, they are really good. Certainly I can try to have them on as soon as possible. Thank you so much, Lewis, for that suggestion. So, yeah, this was a great stream. George Galloway was very generous with his time today. We didn't get to talk. There's some stories I didn't get to talk about. So yeah, there's a lot to catch up on, but early next week I should be live regardless, hopefully with special guests. I'll tell you the special. It's Michael Hudson. Oh wow, this is cognitive. Please, cognitive. Please give me an indication of what you would like to be covered from the socialist side, because I cover China all the time here from the social, and that's from the socialist standpoint. I pivoted geopolitics because that's really where I have the ability to focus on. When we look at socialism, there are many approaches to how to approach socialism. All right. And from the geopolitical standpoint, how I touch on socialism is by touching on anti-imperialism and by moving people of a broad leanings and backgrounds. But I do want to have the deprogram guys on. I've actually been trying to have them on because I would like to do a socialism and geopolitics podcast or YouTube show as well. But, you know, approaches are approaches. And so I fully ascribe to socialism still. And to touch on socialism, I believe, is a wide gambit of topics, politics, viewpoints, and discussion. So, someone's asking Cornel West. That would be invite Cornel West onto the show. Okay, yeah. Well, elections are tough for me this year. I am actually. I'll just leave this here. Profoundly disappointed in the way that the third party, especially those anti-imperialist candidates, have shaped out to be. It is a profound disappointment. Cornel West is a friend, and so this is not certainly a condemnation of him or his principles or anything he stood for, but it is to me a profound disappointment that there isn't a unified ticket. All right. I'm actually, this is a disappointment I share for all of the alternative candidates, but indeed, because there was events that transpired that led to Cornel West not running on the Green Party ticket. And look, I'm not a card-carrying Green Party member, but I've supported Jill Stein in every instance, especially in 2016. When there was a really intense election here. But given that there could have been a unified ticket that does promote, especially the positions on this channel regarding multipolarity and peace, it is a profound disappointment that there is a division there and that has led to a potential split. I've even seen it among people who watch this channel, among people who follow me everywhere. For example, I posted recently, I'm not voting for Biden or Donald Trump. Many people said vote Cornel West or Jill Stein. And that is really the profound disappointment. Not that I thought there would be some huge sweeping election victory for any of them, but to build on a potential movement that breaks the duopoly war machine, the political machine at the head of the war machine. The opportunities for that are probably no greater than now, and yet we have splits, too many splits, splintering. I'm not placing blame on anyone for that necessarily because I don't know the details. I only know the public positions, and I get that this is sensitive stuff. But at the same time, just the fact that it has transpired has been a profound disappointment in my view. So yes, I will be covering the elections as they get closer from a geopolitical perspective. But I don't know if I am going to throw my head in the ring for like, I'm going to support this one or that one because I think that the split itself creates an unfavorable objective situation, which thus means that the best position probably to take is to promote all of them and for people to hopefully those who are running the campaigns like Jill Stein and Cornel West to try to bridge some kind of unity gap so that, in my opinion, the most important political position that the United States can take on right now, especially people, ordinary people, which is peace, which is anti-imperialism, does not suffer, you know, because it can suffer a lot from that. People are guessing my political affiliation. I don't have one. I am not in the CP, definitely not in PSL, although no knock on any of them. Definitely not. I'm not in any political socialist organization for many different reasons. We can get into that another day. Unfortunately, I don't have. Oh, I could talk about that forever and ever, and you will get that. This is why I like to do the chill chats at the end. But I do not have a political affiliation with a party. I'm independent, and that's where I stay. I stay independent of parties for now, until there is what I believe we need, which is a mass party first, because we don't have a socialist organization right now able to. No knock on any of them, because I do support any political party that's willing to fight for peace, especially those from the socialist perspective. So again, I take a non-sectarian position. That's where I stand. I wish they would do the same, but they don't. And we have a long history as to why that is. A long history of why there's still so much division, sectarianism among those forces you would expect to be able to agree. But I'm actually eating into good friends DD Geopolitics stream. They're starting right now as we speak. So before you leave here, be sure to hit that like button, of course, hit that notifications bell, subscribe to the channel. Before that, I guess that's kind of a prerequisite too. And go to the video description and consider becoming a member on Patreon. You can go annually, and you get many different, you can call them perks. I keep all of my content paywall free, but of course you get to suggest guests, ask questions of me. You get a free PDF copy of my book. Becoming a YouTube member and Substack paid members, also great options where you can get increased communication, other kinds of so-called of quote-unquote perks from me. And then, of course, one-time options, PayPal, buy me a coffee are great options as well. So with that said, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in today, and I will see you all again very, very soon. Take care and have a good one. Bye-bye.